We're about to begin the service for Mr. Darrell Holman. We want to welcome everyone that's viewing online, as well as the many people that are here in the chapel. Just a gentle reminder for those of you that are present in the chapel, if you have a cell phone with you, please place it in the silent mode or turn it off completely. That would be appreciated. Officiating this afternoon is Rabbi Yisrael Moshe Gross from Congregation Sherry Zedek, Mishkan Yair.
We'll start the services with one chapter from Psalms, Tehillim, Psalm number 15. It's recited in Hebrew and then in English. Mizmar LeDavid, Adonai mi yagab alecha mishkan barakachecha, heilich tamim ufail tzedek, Dever emes pelvavai, leiragal l'shenei, le'asa l'ri'eu ra, chepa le'nas al krevei, nivze be'inav nimas, es yireh Adonai chabir, nishbel hara, v'le'yamer kaspe le'nasa meneshech, v'sheicher al naki le'lakach, eise eila le'yimei ta'elam. A song of David, Lord, who may sojourn in your tent, who may dwell on your holy mountain, one who walks in purity, does what is righteous, and speaks the truth from the heart, who has no slander on the tongue, nor has done harm to a fellow, nor cast disgrace towards a neighbor, in whose eyes a contemptible person is repulsive, but who honors those who are in awe of the Lord, who swears truthfully even to personal hurt, and never retracts, who does not lend money on interest, nor takes a bribe against the innocent. One who does these things shall never falter. We are here joined together to commemorate the life and pay the last respects to Mr. Darrell Holman, David Samach ben Shmuel, David Samach, the son of Shmuel of blessed memory. He was a loving husband to his wife, Mrs. Bella Holman, loving father of 4 sons, Stephen and Joyce, Michael and Myra, Bradley and Lori, Jeffrey and Yoela. Loving grandfather to Kimberly, Sydney, Henry, Shayna, Katie, Rivka, Sarah, Dave, Yaakov, Zahava, Dasa, Shifra, Ephraim, and Leah. And the treasured great-grandfather of Frankie, Moshe, Elisheva, and Chana Esther. Cherished brother of the late Soretta, the late Arnold, Karen, and the late Beverly, the late Gilbert Blechman. I have to say that I've already been inspired just the last 2 days hearing so much about Mr. Darrell Holman, who I didn't know personally, but I know very well 2 of his sons and have met the other 2 sons. And just from meeting the sons and knowing the sons, I could say that they've obviously done a job well done in raising their children. Darrell, as I've heard, was a hard worker who was loyal and honest and never missed a day of work, even in the Chicago blizzards. He was extremely loyal to his family, caring and loving each and every child. He wanted that each of his boys should grow to be the best that they could be, that they should grow up to be a mensch. That's what they would say. They want that it was very important to them that their children should be a mensch. And that's how they directed each of their children, each of them different from the other, directing them on their path. And they knew they had boundaries. They had boundaries in life. Life wasn't just a free-for-all. You can't just do whatever you want. Because they were imparting to their children that what's important, you have to make sure that at the end you're going to be a mensch. All of these things he tried to do in a loving and caring way, showing them that this is coming out of love, out of his care for them, that he wants what's best for them. The children knew they could ask him for help for things, and they knew that they could always turn to him for advice, for guidance. And if there was something that he didn't know, he would figure it out. He would try to help them to figure it out in order to be able to help them in the best way possible. They knew that they could rely on him. It was important to him that his children receive a Jewish education, whether it be Hebrew school or preparing their bar mitzvah lessons. He wanted them to feel connected to their heritage. He had an unbelievable character trait, which most people don't have, that he would never bear a grudge against somebody else. If someone did something to him, he would say we have to move on. It's not something, we don't hold it against other people, we just move on with life. Another unbelievable character trait, which I think is found less and less nowadays, is he taught his children not to live lives overindulging. We don't need to indulge in all the physical things in this world. We do what we need to do, and that's it. He was a doting grandfather who tried to never play favorites, showing love to every single child and grandchild and great-grandchild. With all this, together with the beautiful marriage that he had with his wife, they built an empire, and we see today the empire that they built together. His life should continue to inspire each of his children, his grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, as they continue to learn from his ways. We will now hear from, we're going to start with his son Bradley, followed by grandson Henry and his granddaughter, followed by his granddaughter Rivka, and after that will be his son Jeff.
It was a blessing to have my father for 93 years. Dad was born in 1931 in Kenosha, Wisconsin, to Sam and Minna Holman. They ran a dry goods grocery store in a one-story building on Sheridan Road, with an apartment attached to the back where he and his two sisters lived. They were observant Jews following strict kosher dietary laws and keeping Shabbos. Tragically, Dad lost both his parents in the summer of 1945 when he was 13 and a half years old. Very fortunate for a strong family structure, Dad lived with Aunt Flora, who raised him until his enrollment into the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dad, you were blessed. While Dad was at UW-Madison, he was an excellent student. He scored mostly A's and was always motivated to keep his grade point average above the threshold to qualify for the United States Armed Services draft deferment. After successfully completing his undergraduate degree with no more draft deferment, Dad enrolled in the Armed Services, choosing the Army as his branch to serve in. During the Korean War, Dad thought a safe way to serve was to apply to be in the military police. The intake officer looked at Dad and said, 5 foot, 6 inches, 130 pounds? Nah, I don't think so. How about the infantry? Not wanting to go into the infantry, Dad ultimately was able to somehow get admitted into the military police division and ended up doing mostly clerical work at the U.S. Disciplinary Barracks in New Cumberland, Pennsylvania. Dad, you were blessed. How Dad met Mom is an interesting story. For those here who already know or have heard it already, I apologize for not getting all the details exactly correct, but the general gist of it goes something like this. Dad asked Aunt Helen if she knew any ladies that she could set him up with for a date. Aunt Helen mentioned she had just arranged for some other gentleman to go on a date with Bitsy Bisno. Fortunate for Dad, it was set up as a blind date, so neither Bitsy nor the gentleman knew or had seen each other before. Dad said he knew Bitsy Bisno from seeing her on Shabbos when Bitsy would accompany her grandmother to synagogue. And Dad thought Bitsy was pretty, and asked Aunt Helen why she didn't think of him when setting up the date with Bitsy. Aunt Helen replied that if you're interested in courting Bitsy, fine. She could solve that problem, canceling the first gentleman who was scheduled to go out with Bitsy and substitute you in his place. After all, Bitsy didn't know the gentleman's name or what he looked like. Well, the date went very well. So much so that Dad didn't want Mom to have the opportunity to date any other gentleman. So he wisely made sure that before the end of each date, he booked another date. The rest, as they say, is history. Actually, it was the beginning of the next generation of the Holman family. Dad, you were blessed. Having a family of 4 rambunctious boys kept Dad and Mom very busy. He was always there, helping, supporting, and encouraging each one of us to the best of our individual abilities. He built a treehouse in the backyard. On an 8-foot stump, he directed the tree trimmers to leave. He installed a rope ladder for entry. Thought being, if one could climb up and down the rope ladder, then you're old enough to play in the treehouse. He built a darkroom in the basement to teach us about photography, one of his favorite hobbies. That was back in the day, of course, before there was digital medium and cameras had film. In the winter, he would flood the backyard by leaving the garden hose on all night, resulting in what would become an ice rink. Our hockey days were just beginning with learning how to skate. On Sundays, Dad would give Mom a break, a day off from the rigors of child rearing. He made special sandwiches for lunch and occasionally took us bowling at Gabby Harton's lanes on Lincoln Avenue, or perhaps to a park. He took great pride in making these special peanut butter sandwiches, carefully removing the crust, cutting the sandwich into several rectangles and triangles, supplementing with American cheese also cut into shapes, arranging the sandwich pieces for eyebrows and mouth, the American cheese for the eyes and nose, and chocolate chips for the pupil of the eye, nostrils, and teeth, using potato chips for hair. He knew his audience. Just one of the great ways that he was leading by example. Each one of us kids did the same thing for our children as well. Dad and Mom kept things simple at home. We basically had 3 rules to follow. If it's not nice, don't say it. Keep your hands to yourself. And MYOB, otherwise known as mind your own business. Dad loved democracy and had a sense of humor. His tongue-in-cheek way of democracy in the family was that each of the 4 children had 1 vote. Mom had 5 votes. Dad had 10 votes. But all kidding aside, Dad was very fair with us, as he was with everyone. In the house, Mom let Dad decorate the den when we watched television and Dad read the newspaper. His talent for interior design was exceptional. From top to bottom and wall to wall, he didn't leave any detail to chance, including the installation of a parquet floor and a custom-made TV cabinet which he personally designed. He had exquisite taste. I guess we could say this was a very early man cave. Over the years, due to the decor, of course, it was the most complimented room in the house. Dad took us on vacations to many tourist destinations around the country. Each year, some were different. We usually traveled by car, spending many hours together. Being a close-knit family, the time we spent together was special. It produced many of the family inside jokes that we still share with each other regularly. Dad, you were blessed. Most of Dad's professional life was managing the office at Cameo Container. His work ethic and dedication were unparalleled. He really enjoyed working there. Always the first to arrive to open up and last to leave to close down and lock up. When we were young, on vacations during downtime, Dad was checking in with the office to see if there's anything he could do to help. For 38 years, Dad's leadership and business acumen helped the growth and success of Cameo in too many ways to count. He had the pleasure of working with his sons at Cameo, some for longer periods than others. What made Cameo even more special as an organization was the great synergy Dad and Uncle Gil shared working together. The ultimate compliment he received professionally was from the best businessman Dad ever knew and respected tremendously. His boss and brother-in-law, our Uncle Gil, said that, I'm paraphrasing, everybody should have a Darrell Holman. Dad was a big advocate for education. The personal accomplishment he is most proud of was to be able to send his children to college, as well as help contribute to the education funds of his grandchildren. Dad, you were blessed. Dad's greatest joy was watching the grandkids grow up over the last 28 years. Some of the older children were able to visit him in his office at Cameo before he retired. He loved watching them play with toys they received for birthdays and Hanukkah. He shared in the many joyous occasions of their lives: the bris milas, bar and bas mitzvahs, musical performances, sporting events, graduations, 3 weddings, and many other noteworthy milestones. Baruch Hashem, he was even able to enjoy the simcha of 4 great-grandchildren. Dad, you were truly blessed. "93 wonderful, beautiful, spectacular, amazing, dare I say, super years of blessing. Because you were so blessed, so too we are blessed to be your family." Due to the challenges of international travel, unfortunately, my wife's not able to be with us here today. She was able to visit with Marty Karen while she was in Israel just yesterday, sharing a few thoughts about Dad. She was able to write something and text it over. The following is from Lori. "Dad, my heart is torn as I write this. One part of it is thankful to be in Israel. The other part of my heart is there. To accompany you to the end of your earthly journey, before your neshama, your soul, ascends to the Kisei HaKavod, the heavenly throne. As the youngest child of yours, I speak from less experience, but my relationship is shared, I'm sure, with others who have known you much longer. When I met you, you welcomed me into the family with an open and full heart. You were delighted that you had a new audience for all of your grandpa jokes, which you told with perfect timing and a smirk on your face. But it was through your stories that I learned about your character. Your actions spoke about your ability to bring out the best in other people's character. I was amazed at how a person who grew up as a young orphan could be such a giving husband, father, and generous person. Even though life was not fair to you, a spirit of fairness prevailed at work and at home. You were generous with all of your resources, including your time, teaching your children skills, even as you help them appreciate your hobbies and develop their own. Photography was a hobby you shared and were good at. You had a great eye for color, contrast, and people. You saw situations in black and white. You were able to take negatives and develop positive outcomes. Others may speak about your accomplishments, but I wish to touch upon your legacy. Your priorities revolved around your family. You were devoted as a husband, father, and brother, as well as to your extended family and friends. You made sure to express your gratitude for your blessings daily and to appreciate the people in your life. You never missed others' birthdays, though you never wanted material gifts for yourself. I admired your less is more attitude, your simple but refined taste, and your sense of fun. Order and routine made up your days. Chivalry and chesed embodied your years. Indeed, it was the chivalry you practiced that won you, quote, the best thing you ever had, unquote, as you said. And that was Mom. The chesed you and Mom did created a lasting example for your family to follow. Please forgive me and my family for anything we might have done to hurt you, and excuse us for any time we did not accord you the proper respect. May we continue through our actions to elevate your soul. We will miss you. Love, Lori.
Okay, so before I begin, this eulogy was written by my dad, Michael, and I'll be reading this in the first person as he wrote it. I remember sitting in shul when I was a little kid, around the time I was in Hebrew school. It could have been Shabbos or the high holidays. When I was a very little kid, I used to sit next to my father and play with strands of his tallis. As I got older, I was learning to read Hebrew and daven. My father grew up in an Orthodox home, and he put on tefillin and davened every day. He told me that when he was in college, he was still putting on his tefillin and davening. So when he read the prayers, he was well-versed and read quickly. I was just a child, just learning, and I couldn't keep up. I would always have to look over his shoulder at his siddur to see what page he was on. I stood up when he stood up. I sat down when he sat down, always checking his page number. Now, no more standing up when he stands up. No more sitting down when he sits down. No more looking at his page number. Although it was a true story, it is also a metaphor. In reality, I am 60 years old and I haven't been looking at his page numbers for a long time now. Like most people, I went to college, have a career, got married, have a family, and working on retiring. Although I don't need to look at his page numbers, I enjoyed his advice. I wanted his advice. He was my father. He was successful. I looked up to him. I always enjoyed learning something from him. And he never stopped being a father. He was always there with a word of advice or a story about his life that I could glean some insight from. He always cut articles out of the newspaper for me about saving for college or saving for retirement or an idea to buy or start a business, usually sent through U.S. mail in an envelope with a stamp. Yes, I will miss that from my father, even though my mother is single-handedly keeping the print newspaper business alive and continuing to educate the entire family with cutout articles. I will miss him dearly. He was a man that seemed to be able to do anything when he put his mind to it. He custom built a dark room in our basement and taught us how to develop film and make photographic prints. He custom built a shed on the side of the house to store our bikes. When a poplar tree in the backyard was cut down, he had them leave an 8-foot stump. He then designed and built a treehouse on top of the stump all by himself. He made ice skating rinks in the backyard in the winter. He taught us logic using electricity when he bought battery holders, wires, light bulbs, buzzers, and switches, and taught us about electrical circuits, parallel and in series. He made lamps out of pop cans. It seemed he could do anything he put his mind to. He was an honest man. When I was injured in the dorm in college and needed stitches, the dorm paid the medical bill, but my father didn't know that. He got a check from his insurance company, and when he gave it to me, I told him that the dorm had paid. He sent the check back to the insurance company because it was the honest thing to do. There was a lot of sports. Whether we were at the Blackhawks game yelling, "Hey Joe, how much time left in the period?" to which the PA announcer always replied, 1 minute to play in the period. Or at Wrigley Field on Father's Day to watch the Cubs, or watching the Bears on TV. Dad liked sports. He never played sports as a child, but enjoyed watching all 4 of his boys play ice hockey and Bradley playing Little League. He liked math and knew I liked math, and he connected math and sports for me. It was that infamous day, January 16th, 1972. We were in the car on the way to the Bleckmans to watch the Dallas Cowboys and the Miami Dolphins in the Super Bowl. Dad explained to us about favorites and underdogs, point spreads, and betting. That was an epiphany for me. On a side note, he did tell us that we were only allowed to bet a quarter, nothing more. He took his math to Las Vegas, where he enjoyed craps and blackjack. I remember when I shared the book Beat the Dealer with him. He loved it and was eager to try it out. For those who don't know, it's a book about how to count cards in blackjack. He and my mom liked going on cruises, 22 of them to be exact. Caribbean, Mediterranean, and one that was 31 days long around South America with a stop in Antarctica. He and my mom liked dancing. They used to go for lessons all the time and go out dancing on the weekends. But you all know about their dancing. Admit it. At weddings and bar mitzvahs, you were all afraid to get on the dance floor next to them once they got going. One last thing about my father. He would never greet you with things like, "How are you?" or "What's going on?" or things like that. He almost always greeted you with the question, "What's good?" He wanted to focus on the positive. He wanted to talk about the things that were good. Darrell had 93 really good years. And even if a few of them were not, let's focus on the good ones. Let's remember all the many, many good things about him.
Hello. Thank you all for being here today.
You want me to say something?
No, it's okay. My name is Rivka Stavsky, and I'm the first and oldest grandchild. Grandpa was so proud of me and all of the rest of the grandchildren. He always reminded me that I was the one that made him a grandfather. Grandpa was such a special man. He was so generous with a huge, kind heart. One of the things that made Grandpa the most proud was his grandchildren, and now his great-grandchildren. Here are some words and core memories from us in no particular order. This is from Sarah, my sister. Grandma and Grandpa would always used to take me to the Museum of Science and Industry or the Lincoln Park Zoo for my birthday each year, and I got to spend a whole day with them. It was so special to be able to get to spend one-on-one quality time with my grandparents. From Katie. She and Grandpa went to the Museum of Science and Industry as well. This was something that Grandma and Grandpa felt was really important, to be able to take us out on our special day, make us feel special. From Henry. Arriving at the family gatherings and their house on Kedvale, I always remember the hugs he gave when you walked in the door. He gave you a little squeeze just to make you sure that you knew that you were loved. From Ephraim, when he would spin us around in the white chairs in his house and go vroom. He also was the only one that came to my Gemara Siyum in the 5th grade because Ima and Abba were busy, and he would come to all of our school affairs. From Leah. When we would go swimming with Grandma and Grandpa and always make sure to come down and visit and watch us with a bag of donuts in hand. They always had yummy treats, and they always made sure that the grandchildren that kept kosher had kosher treats. From Shifra. Grandpa would always come to all of our school events, whether it was a graduation, a show, a state fair. He would be there taking pictures and shepping nachas. Then he would make a collage for all of us to keep, and we used to hang them up in our homes, and we could remember the special day that they were there for. From Zahava. He was always generous with presents. I liked when he let us play in his office, and also when he would tell stories. And Grandma and Grandpa took me to the Art Institute for a birthday present. From Hadassah, when he used to spin us in the white chairs. Obviously, this was a great core memory for all of us. Everybody mentioned it. From Kimberly. I remember sitting on Grandpa's lap and lighting Hanukkah candles together when I was around 4 years old because I couldn't do it yet myself. From Nisanel. Thank you for accepting and loving me as one of the grandchildren. I will miss the stories from times long ago and the lessons you taught to be proud of our Jewish identity. He would always make us laugh hysterically, and always give us big hugs with a squeeze just to make you feel loved. These are some words from the grandchildren. Thank you.
Just trying to get through this without crying. It's not fair. Okay. What does this say? Oh, okay. So I wanted to start off before I get into all of the main stuff about how Mom and Dad, the house that you made was, you were like kind of like almost like a safe zone or a safe harbor for everyone else. I just wanted to bring an example of like those Pesach Sedarim that you would make every year. Mom and Dad would always have the family over, of course, and then an eclectic group of whoever, sometimes people, that Russian Jews or whoever. We once had an Egyptian at our Seder. It was kind of interesting. And various relatives, but it felt like, that they were like a place where people could almost call home. And so with that in mind, I just wanted to mention one particular person, which was special to Mom and Dad, who they, I guess, in a way, became her surrogate parents, and that's Mindy, who was Dad's niece, and she was very, very, very dear to them, and she passed away recently without a funeral. She lived alone with her dogs and was very close with Mom and Dad. She was always kind-hearted and would bring challah and cookies each week to my parents to show her gratitude. And so she really was, I think like the nature of the home that Mom had and the nature of the relationship with the family and the cousins, she really was part of our family, and she'll be sorely missed. Okay, so as the brothers, as we were talking and deciding, trying to minimize overlapping stories, so I thought I would share some of my particular memories, and I would start with Dad's, what they call a pintel yid, or his Jewish spark. Okay. As Brad mentioned, Dad was born in Kenosha in 1931. There were very few Jewish day schools. He went to public school and also Hebrew school. And the rabbi in Kenosha, Dad related to me once that the rabbi said that Dad should go off, had a good head for learning, he should go off to yeshiva in Chicago. But Dad's parents said that he was too young to leave home. So, but then, and Dad would always do the traditional stuff with us. We had the Shabbos meal and all that, Kiddush and challah, and it's beautiful. And when I was 18 and learning in yeshiva in Israel, Dad sent me this letter, which is kind of like uncharacteristic of him to write me 2 whole pages from the heart. Usually it was like, Mom did this, and this happened, and that happened. But this was like, anyway. He wrote, I'm certainly proud of all the knowledge and facility you've gained in the heritage of our people. My grandfather, my father's father, Ephraim, who I remember with fond affection, was a Talmudic scholar, considered the most learned man in Hebrew in Wisconsin. As a kid, I sure was proud to be his grandson! ! He studied constantly and even helped form the Holman Shul in Sheboygan, and he lived to a ripe old age, as did his wife. My father continues to write that his father, Ephraim Holman, was also very observant and instilled in me the Orthodox discipline. And now you seem to be following in their footsteps of helping to keep the flame of Judaism alive. And I think that's where his heart was ultimately. I'll try to circle back to that at the end. As Brad mentioned, when Dad was 13, he and his 2 older sisters, Soretta and Beverly, suffered a terrible tragedy when both of their parents died just 3 weeks apart. Imagine that. But if Dad hadn't mentioned this fact to us, you'd never know it. He was self-assured, deliberate, and independent. Dad, as he mentioned, Dad excelled in college and even earned commendations for his work in the military. Michael mentioned he found a commendation that Dad had from his superior officer saying that he did everything perfectly. You could always rely on anything you gave him to do. You knew it was going to be done right. And so you never really knew that Dad had suffered such a great loss in his youth. After his parents passed away, Dad related that he would go to Minyan every day to say Kaddish, and sometimes, Kenosha was small, sometimes waiting for them to call the 10th man, which usually was the owner of a junkyard down the road. Dad married Mom in 1960, and they started their life together in a little apartment on Pratt and Sheridan with Lake Michigan as their backyard. Of the extended family, Dad was always the more traditional one, and we actually have a little picture of Mom and Dad making a Pesach Seder in their little apartment at a little card table with guests. As the family grew and they moved to Skokie, they attended Skokie Valley Traditional. For as long as anyone could remember, Dad sat in literally the same seat for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur every year for decades. In those days, Yom Kippur services went all day long without a break, and we would come in and sit with him an hour here, an hour there. We'd go home or just run around the shul and then come back, and he was always there at the same spot. He sent us to Hebrew school. He taught us to daven and bench, and put on tallis and tefillin. And he related stories connecting and endearing us with the generations before him. When I decided to switch from Niles North to the academy and then to yeshiva in Israel, Dad was hesitant, concerned that I'd go off the deep end. That's why he wrote this long letter. But in the end, he wrote to me to express how proud he was of the path I had chosen. And I reciprocated by only going off the deep end a little. Dad had a great sense of humor, and he could tell a joke better than anyone. Maybe Uncle Arnold, we're not sure, but he was also excellent. Dad's timing was literally perfect, and it made all the difference. Our Pesach Sederim were lively, always with lots of guests, and his stories always left us entertained and laughing. At Cameo, where he managed the office, you would see him in his element. He really was. You'd go sit in his office. At home, he'd come home and he's reading the paper. And you see him in his element in his office. And he'd be talking to someone in the office, or he'd make his rounds on the floor. And everyone appreciated Dad's friendly and lighthearted nature and his wit. Even in the hospital these past few weeks and months, when it was difficult for him to talk or converse, you could see him make that funny kind of smirk on his face as he enjoyed a humorous comment. We mentioned how Dad works really hard. It's true. You'd go with him to work, and you'd leave so early in the morning that it would still be dark out. And did you know that WGN actually broadcast the cattle and hog reports every morning for the farmers? Had no idea. If you go to work with Dad, you'd know that. He'd be the last one to lock up the office at night as well, coming home late, many times after we had already finished dinner. He loved us and worried about us and worked hard to provide everything for us. What Grandpa enjoyed most, above all else, was seeing his children and then his grandchildren grow and to see their accomplishments. He worried about us. He gave us his advice and encouraged us to be independent and make good choices. This meant that once we finished college, we were literally out of the house. And if we later came back to live at home, he would actually charge us rent. Later, we realized that he just used the rent money to buy us stuff. But that was his way of saying, you're on your own. And he really encouraged our independence. His children and grandchildren, and then great-grandchildren, were the pride of his life. His face would light up when they would come to visit. His face would light up when they would come to visit him. When he was in his wheelchair, their visits would be the highlight of his day. And when he was in the hospital, their visits would lift his spirits. So, sorry, this is getting hard. Sorry. To finish up, I want to circle back to Dad's love for Judaism and share a truly sweet anecdote which played out this past week. The other day when I was waiting with Dad in the ER for some test results, and he dozed off. But then he started to become very animated and agitated, and I was getting worried. Not knowing what to do, I decided to sing something to calm him down. So I sang Adon Olam for him, and thankfully it helped. But then, surprisingly in his sleep, as I was singing, he started to sing along with a smile on his face. I was like blown away. Like he wasn't conscious. So I racked my brain and sang any synagogue tune that I thought he would know. I came up with Yigdal and Ein Kelokenu. I did Aleinu. And then all of Cantor Cooper's beautiful Rosh Hashanah melodies that Dad had listened to for all of those years. And as I sang, you could see Dad's lips moving as if to sing along. On this last Sunday, at the behest of Yoela, she said, you better say Vidui, the last rites with Dad. He was barely conscious. And with his eyes closed, he actually said Amen to each part. Then we sang, And then we sang Adon Olam again. One more time. With the ending, it says, I entrust my soul to you, and I will not fear. Dad, just want to say, I mentioned, someone once mentioned that you really shouldn't be celebrating birthdays because when you're born, you didn't do anything yet. And now we could really celebrate with you. It was kind of bittersweet. You lived a rich, wonderful life, and we love you, and we'll miss you.
We end the services here with a prayer for the soul as the soul goes up to the next world with all the merits of all the unbelievable deeds and actions that he did, like we heard throughout all the speeches today. I'll say in Hebrew and then in English. El Malayacham im Sheikhin beim Reimim am Zem Nucha Nechayin al Kanvei Ashchina b'Malis Kedoshim Mitayim Kezayar Rekia Masir Mes Nishmas David Samach ben Shmuel Shalach Leilamai Avur She'anachnu Mispalim Bad Askars Nishmasei Began Eden Tem Nuchas Elchim Balayachmim Estireu B'Seisek Knafav Leilamim V'Yitzar B'Tzarech Hayim Es Nishmasei Yadoi Noyu Nachlasei V'Yanuach B'Shaloi Mamish Kavei V'Neimar Amein. God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper repose on the sheltering wings of your presence in the lofty levels of the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament unto the soul of Shmuel, of David Samach, the son of Shmuel, who has gone to his world, and for whose memory we pray. May his repose be in paradise. May the Master of compassion bring him under the cover of God's wings and bind his soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be his heritage, and may he repose on his resting place in peace. And let us respond, Amen.
Just a few brief announcements before we leave for the cemetery. The interment will take place at West Lawn Cemetery in Norwich. Our procession will form in the parking lot. We'll make sure that the vehicles going to the cemetery have an orange funeral sticker for the inside portion of your front windshield, as well as a magnetic flag for on top of your vehicle. And please use your bright headlights and your emergency flashers at all times while in procession. Following the interment, which is approximately 4 o'clock by the time the family gets back to the Barclay, they will be gathering at the hospitality room there at 4545 West Toohey Avenue in Lincolnwood. And then the Shiva will resume at Jeffrey and Yoella Holman's residence at 7406 North Fairfield in Chicago. And the specific Shiva times and minyan times are listed in the service folder you received today. If you did not receive one, they are available as you exit. And also for those of you viewing online, this information is on Chicago Jewish Funeral's website as well. The following people have been selected to serve as pallbearers this afternoon. As I call your name, please step forward to help escort the casket from the chapel. Henry Holman, Katie Holman, David Holman, B.J. Carmen, Skylar Edelman, and David Schenker. At this time, I'll ask everyone to please rise as the casket is being escorted from the chapel.